people and country now say as we say, these freedoms we will fight for side by side and throughout our lives until one. These are the closing words on a copy of the Freedom Charter that I have as it was signed at the Congress of the People in 1955. That Freedom Charter, our South African Freedom Charter, and our Freedom Charter is a people, does not belong to a particular political party, does not belong to a particular race or a group of people, but it belongs to everyone who lives in South Africa, as the opening words of the Freedom Charter specify. This is what governed the struggle to get us where we are as a country, where I am as a citizen, I am as a brother, as a fellow South African, to you as our brothers and sisters throughout this country. The reality is, this is what our country was built on. This is what the freedom was fought for. And it is absolutely appalling that we find our country in the situation that we find it right now. I'm extremely distressed. I'm equally worried as you are. I'm also worried about food shortages, fuel shortages, the unemployment, poverty, as well as other factors that are affecting every one of us today, all under the cloud of a global pandemic of COVID-19. So I feel your pain. I've lost family right in these times. I lost close family of my wife. I lost my grandmother not 6 months ago. I lost my own father 12 months ago. Just 2 or 3 days now that we lost him more than a year ago. So I feel your pain. I feel your struggles. And if you think I don't understand poverty, I'm the grandson of a domestic worker, a descendant of indentured laborers and slaves in this country, as many are in this country. We grew up with almost negligible resources, but we grew up with love, passion, dedication, and service that I learned from my grandparents, my parents, and I hope to pass on to my kids in my everyday life. But I want us to be positive, because if we look at the journey it's taken us, the thousands, the millions of lives that have been sacrificed, have been disrupted and affected for us to have the democracy that we have in South Africa, we need to pay homage to what's been done for us and how much we've overcome. Yes, there's significant unrest at this point. Yet there's significant uncertainty. There's significant frustration. And there are a range of factors that are affecting this. But we need to sit back for a moment and appreciate where we are as a country. We're one of the youngest democracies in the world. We're one of the most diverse countries in the world. And we need to respect that. But we also need to not stop striving for equality, reduction in unemployment, and the eradication of poverty. In a country that has some of the most amazing resources in the world, we have some of the largest gold, diamond, platinum, and natural resources that we have as a country, that we provide to the world. But as a people, we have had some change post-94. We have had new rights provided to us that were stripped of us and denied to us as a people of South Africa, that were denied. I was denied, my family was denied, and your family has been denied. But what got us here was the positivity. My growing up was difficult because my father in the 80s, as a school teacher who could barely make enough to pay for our house and food, and my mum worked as a housewife back then, doing anything and everything possible to make sure we have bread and milk and the basic essentials. Even in that time, as we struggled as a family and we struggled as a people, as a community, as a household, and the community that I grew up in, my father still worked with Professor Fatima Mir and other struggle veterans to provide education, teaching, and in the learning environment in what was then called the Bantu system. Because then they, even in their wisdom, realized that we as a people cannot progress if we do not provide for our own people. And through that process in the mid-80s, when my father taught for Professor Fatima Mir and the systems in schools, she had then told him, Teddy, power will come to us at some point. But when that happens, we need people on the other side to serve our communities, be with us, and to protect us. And in 86 or 87, he had become a police reservist to serve the community. Now that's absolutely laudable and was absolutely necessary, something he did for more than 20 years as a reservist, and then as he evolved in his professional career, had become a school principal, and as a principal and a police reservist, then moved into the education and training environment for the South African Police Services, where he eventually retired not less than about 2 years now. And regrettably, we lost him a year ago, so he barely got to enjoy his retirement after 40 years. But the message from this is everyone has contributed to the struggle in some way or the other, in some form or the other, whether it is through their direct action or their sacrifice or their support in some way and form. But it has been a long struggle. It has been a difficult struggle. And I can assure you, the fact that my father was a reservist and serving the communities, he was never home. My father would literally go from the government school that he taught at to drive to the police station almost most weekends, park the car, book on duty as they called it, pick up a vehicle, come home, change into uniform, and go back and serve the community till late Sunday night or even Monday morning. Because he knew at that time the disparities were there. It was apparent. And to be able to at least make some difference to people's lives, to make difference to the black lives of our people and our communities, was necessary. Because if power stood in the hands of the previous dispensation, it would have not improved the lives of our people. And he did this for years. Through his career and almost being focused on the community for most of his life, he then served as a principal in schools that had pass rates of less than 10% and got them to 90%. He built schools in Stanger South, and many of you who may be watching this will be aware of that. But he did that not because it was for his salary. He did it because he needed to improve the community. Stanger South Secondary was a 100% black school, as they called it in the old system. And the principal prior to him ran a fish shop in the school and didn't care if the pass rate was less than 10%. Within a 5-year period, my father had made sure the schools were renovated. We as family and our religious communities went in, we scrubbed and cleaned the schools. He brought in corporate sponsorship, built in new blocks, and got the pass rate in excess of 87% prior to him moving on from that posting. He would take lunch to school for students who couldn't afford lunch. He used to physically tell them to come to the principal's office to fetch lunch. He would take 8 or 10 packs of food for students, because he was dedicated and realized that a child with an empty stomach cannot focus on education because they have more primary needs. But how did he make it sustainable? He got the communities involved. He got the communities involved in the entire North Coast, in KZN, where a lot of the volatility is in the country right now, so that they could provide sandwiches and food, and at least these kids could have their meals at their school. So they were provided for. And this is not a discussion about what he did. But he was one little tiny contributor, one little needle in a haystack, because others had contributed multifold more, millions more. And the founding fathers of our freedom, the late Nelson Mandela, the Ahmed Katradas, the Jane Naidus, the Willie Nayers, the Oliver Tambos, the Sisulus, and everyone else that contributed and sacrificed their lives, did everything in their power. But what is important in this time that we need to remember, and I know a lot of this because through my journey as a student and a professional, I had come into contact with the likes of Ahmed Katrada, and very importantly, Mr. Mosi Mullah, who was part of the struggle, arrested and imprisoned many times. And he had spent time with me for a magazine article, which I had planned to write for 4 pages. And I had spent days on end with him, learning what the struggle was like outside of what's in the media, outside of what's on the internet, but what it was like to actually be in the struggle, what it was to be actually incarcerated, what the emotions were, what the pains were, how his kids grew up without knowing who he was, and to rekindle those relationships later. But importantly, the sacrifices they made were not with guarantees, but with an innate feeling and love to free our people and country. Not because they believed it was guaranteed, but because they believed it had to be done and will be done, and they believed it could happen in their lifetimes. Millions died in the struggle. Steve Biko and others' lives were sacrificed in the process. But what was important through their struggle, and what we take to learn and what we need to reflect on today as we in a country are being divided by various things we inherited from previous systems, is positivity is what took us forward. The hope that we can have a better life for tomorrow, the hope that we can improve our lives, the hope that when everyone in this country lives as equals, when everyone has the same rights, then there will be some level of progress as we are. And it didn't take very long for us to raise the World Cup in '95 and other major events and wins that we have had around the world. So we need to celebrate our wins as a country. We need to celebrate that we have come a long road. We have won a lot. We have gained a lot, and we will continue to do so if we focus on what can be, what should be, and also importantly, what you and I need to do every day in small measure so that we can change our lives, our families' lives, our communities' lives, and importantly, our country and the continent of Africa. Because we need to change the perception that Africa has cannibalism, Africa has a begging bowl, Africa is poor, Africa is in distress. Yes, we have challenges, but let's not forget a large amount of the resources that support the West were stolen from South Africa, Africa, and other countries that were colonized. A lot of this segregation, this division that we have today, this, if I may use the word loosely and apologize, but tribalistic perspective, distinctions on race, distinctions on groupings, distinctions on languages, distinction on everything, was created by a system built to build its power. Because you have to ask yourself, how did a little island like the UK control the world? It's because they were good and they knew not how to manipulate only military might, but mental might and how to manipulate the minds of those that they wanted to control. Because if they taught you that you were less, you believed it. If they treated you less, you believed it. If they treated you and showed you that you were different from your very own, purely by virtue of a language, by virtue of the color of your skin, you started to believe it. But what they didn't want you to know, for the last 100 years, 200, 300 years of oppression, all of us struggled the same. All people of color, as well as a large amount of people who were not black at that point, who may have not actively opposed apartheid, also struggled. But in reality, people of color, all colors, the colors in South Africa, the Indians in South Africa, the black people of South Africa, we're all black. Because if you were not white, you were black in South Africa then and you're black in South Africa now. But your identity should be is when we struggled together, when we had nothing together. As a people, we stayed united. That is what freed this country. There was no segregation of saying the Xhosa party, or the Zulu party, or the Ndebele party, or the Hindi party, or the Tamil party. No. There was originally the African National Congress, and then the United Democratic Movements and other parties which were formed at that point. There was then the Natal Indian Congress. There was then the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress. There were multiple organizations. But when it came time to focus on building this country and fighting for what is rightfully and continues to be rightfully ours, they united together. They united in their fight. And if you doubt that, look at the number of people of diverse backgrounds, all black in different shades, that were part of the Rivonia trial, including white people. They were all part of this fight. They were all imprisoned and incarcerated. They gave up their lives with no guarantee of success. But if you look at the Rivonia trial, the treason trials, and the decisions, and how people are incarcerated, it's because they stood for one thing: freedom. Freedom, because with freedom comes equality. With equality, we can improve our lives and the next generations that come ahead of us. I'm not the young boy that struggled in growing up in a family during the apartheid state. And I was very young when we gained freedom as a country, but I was very well aware because my parents were there to teach us and demonstrate to us on what we had sacrificed and what will be sacrificed for the development of the country. Now, as a professional, as a leader, as a servant leader, as a fellow South African, I strongly believe for a moment we need to step aside from our differences and unite as a people. Otherwise, we're feeding into the narrative of the legacy that was created to keep us divided and never allow us to progress. I do not condone the violence that has taken place. I do not condone the looting. I do not condone the killing. Wrong is wrong, irrelevant of who does it. Right is right, even if nobody does it. But that underpins the fact that as a people, we need to look past our differences. We need to look at what unites us and what's a common purpose. Because if we don't, as a fragmented society, as people irrelevant of color, we will then continue to fight battles that are absolutely unnecessary. What is necessary and 100% important is we need to focus on improving education, reducing unemployment, creating opportunities, and creating more equal distribution of the resources of the country. Is there a disparity that we inherited from pre-94? That is 100% correct. There are many decisions that were made, and they were necessarily made, and I'm not qualified nor have the capacity to criticize. But with hindsight 2020, we can agree that some of the trade-offs that were made during the CODESA negotiations were necessary to be made at that time to avoid a civil war and bloodshed and to make progress as a country. But there are questions on how much did we give away and how much did we negotiate away to have peace that may not be sustainable because the inequality will persist. I know after school I joined the military because I believed we need to serve the country. Built on the history of what my father did and many others and thousands of others has did, following those footsteps, I took to uniform to study, to work, to train, and to serve the country. I did 13 years in uniform. And I can tell you, even in that world, there was a protected peace, which many know of and many may not. There was what they called the Sunset Clause that was given around 93, 94. And that meant people who were in uniformed environment, in the armed forces, in whatever form or the other, were given 20 years for which their jobs were protected, their posts were protected, and they would not be removed due to transformation and the necessity to properly reflect the demographic of our country. But that also meant there was a massive abuse, and there was a 20-year runway for specific individuals with their selfish intentions, not everyone, but specific individuals who had selfish intentions to set themselves up. What was depressing to me was the World Cup became the perfect excuse to break down specific facilities, break down access, break down what was available to the country in the name of redevelopment and preparing for the World Cup. But in reality, it was because the Sunset Clause was approaching. That is how our illustrious armed forces, that was once the pride of Africa and the world, has been disabled to some extent because of structural changes and legacy issues. There is and are dedicated leaders who remain there. There are dedicated colleagues of mine who continually strive every day, the unsung heroes, because they still believe in a better life for everyone that they serve, for every one of you and every one of us. As a people, as a South Africa, we need to focus on that. So there's a lot being said today. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of struggle. There's been a lot of loss of life. But the loss of the critical infrastructure we have right now will not just affect those business owners. It will not just affect me. It will not affect you alone. It affects all of us. When there's a food shortage, we're all going to struggle. When there is fuel shortage, it will affect all of us. And when that infrastructure has been damaged already, it doesn't get rebuilt overnight. It doesn't matter if there may or may not be insurance matters. But if the critical infrastructure of the country continues to be damaged and we continue to buy into the narrative that this is about inequality only and it's about people being hungry, which is a material reality, we're missing the point that there are other forces at play. There's a third force and a specific direction of how this is being played out. But there's also a specific direction of how this is being misdirected. Because this all started around the time the former president, Jacob Zuma, was imprisoned, which is a starting point. And a very privileged family sat aside and said, fight for our father, fight for the country. But they were not on the front lines. They were not there to lead the fight to prison to say, let our father go. No. They said, do what you can. And in effect, it led to the country having the riots and destruction that have ensued and continues to ensue today. It led to the point that the military had to be deployed yet again, so that many liberties may be protected, but also some may be denied by their deployment. But there are forces who have specific agendas of why this instability is necessary. There are specific forces of why this needs to happen. And to mitigate this, to fight against this, we as a people need to unite. Black, white, brown, and irrelevant of your color. We need to focus as humanity. Because in this period, and destruction and disruption, people are dying, and they continue to die due to the COVID pandemic. People are dying at an accelerated pace in some of the facilities, and I have colleagues who work there who are saying we've run out of oxygen. We have run out of spare parts. The ventilators are running, but we don't know for how much longer. We've had colleagues lose medical practices and healthcare practices because they were destroyed in totality. We have depression amongst healthcare professionals and all essential workers who are part of a system that was trying to keep us on a very thin line to keep us safe, because we have almost no safety margin with COVID. We have poverty, we have hunger, we have inequality. But with the pandemic, there's a very thin line of how we're trying to balance that, and the government's trying to do that, and the people on the front lines are trying to make sure that happens. They burnt out already. I can assure you they have been burnt out a long time ago. I am equally frustrated, yet we continue to strive on. I've lost family. I have just had family come out of high care right now. But we continue to contribute as a society, as a little contributor, as a servant contributor to this country, because we believe everyone deserves a better life. We believe everyone deserves to survive this pandemic. But in this process, we've now gone ahead and taken the country back decades by destroying the infrastructure, creating pandemonium and destruction. Please, I appeal to you, as a people, as a country, as human beings, let's not get distracted by the sideshows. Let's not feed into the narrative of the paid social media influencers who are being paid to peddle a particular agenda or narrative. Let's not talk political parties. Let's not talk color or race. Let's talk humanity. Everyone is in this together. We need to focus on helping each other, a brotherhood and sisterhood, and a united focus as a family, as a country, so that we can better improve our lives, that of the continent, and change the narrative to the world. Because I was distressed when I saw some of the big major headlines. Cannibalism in South Africa. South Africa is ungovernable. South Africa is burning. There is no food. People can't go anywhere. It feeds into the narrative of destruction and total anarchy and lack of control, which some individuals and groupings want. But it doesn't change the narrative that we as a people are just as powerful as we are today, as we were pre-94. We can be just as united as we were then as we are now, and should be now, so that we can focus on what's important. We are going to have massive food shortages and other challenges, but help feed each other every day. Help protect each other every day, because we need each other in some form or the other, purely because we're human beings, purely because love will prevail, righteousness will prevail, and the love of family always prevails. This anarchy is temporary. This frustration is temporary. We will prevail as a people because South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black or white, in the famous words of our Freedom Charter. Please stay well, stay safe, and let's build our country together.